And my name is Debbie Moran. I host these Zoom meetings. And along with Gayle Martin, we also co-program. So we find the speakers. And ever since I lived with a 16-year-old ballet dancer in New York, my mom set me up at the sort of a safe women's home called Swiss Townhouse in New York City at 35 West 65th Street. And I was put together with a 16-year-old dancer who was studying at School of American Ballet. And she taught me a lot about ballet. I learned that it's not the fast, flashy stuff that impresses ballerinas, it's the slow extensions, and I could hear them counting the seconds in the audience. I learned that underneath all that beautiful costume was very ugly toes, and she would give me a peek at what happens under those toe shoes. And I went to the New York City Ballet and American Ballet Company a number of times, and was able to see some of these amazing dancers who are now legend, like Peter Martins and Suzanne Farrell, Martina Hamill. I think she might be in one of your videos, and of course Baryshnikov. And I didn't see Nureyev, but I did ride the elevator with him. He was teaching at American Ballet Theater, and Peter Martins, who we will see later, who was a principal dancer at New York City Ballet at the time, and then became its director after Balanchine left. So the best thing that could happen to my 16-year-old dancer roommate was either passing Peter Martins on the street, who lived about a block down from us, or even better, when she came in walking on air, she would come in and say, "Mr. B looked at me." So Mr. B is one of the greatest choreographers of all time, George Balanchine. And for me, he's also one of the greatest choreographers. As a musician who doesn't know a lot about dance, I noticed when I went to the ballet, his choreography so closely followed the phrasing and the music, more so than many other choreographers. And when he died, I saw it wasn't just me. I heard dancers revering him as one of the greatest of all time. So I have invited Betsy McMillan, who's trained at the Houston Ballet Academy, then went to Hartford, Connecticut, and directed ballet over there. Is that correct? And then came back, and now she's on the faculty of Houston Ballet Academy. And she is going to give us a PowerPoint about George Balanchine and his history, and you will see why he's so musical. And then after that, I'm going to ask some questions as an ignorant musician about the interaction between music and dance, because I've noticed some things, I've observed some things playing ballet music with and without dancers. So without further ado, I'm going to ask actually Susan Fishman, one of our presidents, to just welcome everyone and introduce the meeting.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. Just from what Debbie has said, this is going to be a most fabulous program that we can all learn a lot from as musicians and admirers of dance. Thank you, Betsy, for being here. And on behalf of the other two co-presidents, Dr. Roy Riley and Susie Marion, we thank you for your support. And please look for 2 more programs that are coming up quite quickly. So please check your email frequently. And I'll say a few words at the end, but now I'll turn it back to Debbie. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to be with you all. Thank you for the invitation. And I have a deep passion for ballet and George Balanchine in particular, who in my mind is unparalleled as foremost contemporary choreographer in the world of ballet today. So I'm going to dive right in with this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because we have a PowerPoint, and then I will turn off my camera to help with some of the bandwidth as well. Okay. George Balanchine is regarded as the foremost contemporary choreographer in the world of ballet. Born in Europe, the son of a composer, Balanchine early in life gained a knowledge of music that far exceeds that of most of his fellow choreographers. He began studying the piano at the age of 5, and following his graduation in 1921 from the Imperial Ballet School, he enrolled in the State's Conservatory of Music, where he studied piano and music theory, including composition, harmony, and counterpoint for 3 years. Such extensive musical training made it possible for Balanchine as a choreographer to communicate with a composer of such stature as Igor Stravinsky. The training also gave Balanchine the ability to reduce orchestral scores on the piano, an invaluable aid in translating music into dance. Balanchine made his own dancing debut at the age of 10 as a Cupid in the Mariinsky Theater Ballet Company's production of The Sleeping Beauty. He joined the company as a member of the Corps de Ballet at 17 and staged one work for them called Enigmas. Most of his energies during this period, however, were concentrated on choreographic experiments outside the company. In the summer of 1924, Balanchine was one of 4 dancers who left the newly formed Soviet Union for a tour of Western Europe. All of these dancers later became well known in Europe and the United States. All 4 dancers were invited by impresario Sergei Diaghilev to audition for his Ballet Russe in Paris and were accepted into the company. Diaghilev also had his eye on Balanchine as a choreographer. And after watching him stage a new version of the company's Stravinsky ballet Le Chant de Rossignol, Diaghilev hired him as ballet master to replace Nijenska. Shortly after this, Balanchine suffered a knee injury, which limited his dancing and correspondingly bolstered his commitment to full-time choreography. Balanchine served as ballet master with Ballet Russe until the company was dissolved following Diaghilev's death in 1929. After that, he spent the next 5 years on a variety of projects, which took him all over Europe, choreographing for the Royal Danish Ballet, making a movie in England, staging dance extravaganzas for Britain's popular Cochrane musical theater revues, and working for de Basel's Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. Balanchine loved many genres of dance, including jazz. In Teresa Ruth Howard's talk on Balanchine, she says, you see with the creation of Serenade in 1935, when we see the pulling off of the leg. In Concerto Barocco in 1948, where the first movement is all rhythm and counterpoint, the way the arms work to facilitate the movement looks and feels like tap dance. And I have a wonderful video clip of Arthur Mitchell, who was the first African-American principal dancer for George Balanchine for New York City Ballet, who later went on to become the founding artistic director of Dance Theater of Harlem. And in this clip that I'm about to share with you, you can hear Arthur Mitchell himself speaking about Balanchine's love for other genres and how he incorporated it into his work. So I'm just going to switch here to this video. Thanks for your patience, everybody.
Composer. And so there was this wonderful exchange of information. And what was interesting, which many people do not realize, he would say, when we did episodes, he told us, go study with Martha, so you'll understand the source of the movement. He said, if you want beautiful hands, go take Spanish dancing. He said, if you want to use the back, take Dunham. He always used all the different techniques at that particular time. And I think the big bond was that we all loved Fred Astaire. We all loved Bojangles. And that sort of style, and if you just look at, I was just looking at some of the pictures of Mr. B. You never see him cut. He's always like this, like that, utilizing the form of jazz, what we call jazz today. And so those things, like when you see people that have that kind of that jazz impetus, it works. Case in point, we all know Symphony in C. And the finale goes. But he wanted into the hip, it takes another dynamic. And so he used that, then he loved tap dance. When he would choreograph, because he was such a phenomenal musician, he wouldn't show you the steps. He'd go, I want da 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 da. So okay, da 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 da. What's the step? He said, there isn't anything yet. Let's just get the beat. Because out of that da 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 da, the movement came. It's not a glissade, it's not a jeté. And he says, you know, my theater. Once you name it, it's already done. So let's explore. but he used the syncopation and the rhythm and the kinetic energy that you find here in America.
Boston-born dance connoisseur Lincoln Kirstein harbored a dream. He wanted to establish an American school of ballet that would equal, even rival, the established European schools, and he wanted to establish an American ballet company. Through Nijinsky, whom Kirstein had assisted in her research for a biography for her husband, Kirstein met Balanchine and saw in him the means by which this dream could be realized. If only the choreographer could be persuaded to relocate to the United States. Balanchine agreed to come to America that very year, and the first production of the Balanchine-Kirstein collaboration was the School of American Ballet, founded in 1934. The first day of class, in fact, was January 2nd of that year. The school remains in operation to this day, training students for the New York City Ballet and companies throughout the United States and the world. The first ballet Balanchine choreographed in this country, Serenade, to music by Tchaikovsky, was created as a workshop for students at the school and had its world premiere outdoors in the estate of a friend near White Plains, New York. In 1935, Kirstein and Balanchine set up a touring company of dancers from the school and called it the American Ballet. The same year, the Metropolitan Opera invited the company to become its resident ballet, with Balanchine as the Met's ballet master. Tight funding, however, permitted Balanchine to mount only 2 completely dance-oriented works while with the Met: a dance drama version of Gluck's Orfeo and Eurydice, and an all-Stravinsky program featuring a revival of one of Balanchine's first ballets, Apollo, plus 2 new works. In 1937, these 3 ballets formed the program when Balanchine directed his first of 3 Stravinsky festivals, paving the way for the later, larger efforts in 1972 and 1982. Despite the popular and critical success of the program, Balanchine and the Met parted company in 1938, and Balanchine spent his next years teaching at the school and working in musical theater and films. In 1941, he and Kirstein assembled the Ballet Caravan sponsored by Nelson Rockefeller, which toured South America with such new Balanchine creations as Concerto Barocco and Ballet Imperial, later renamed Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto No. 2. Then, from 1944 to 1946, Balanchine was called in as artistic director to help revitalize the Ballet Russe to Monte Carlo. He created Raimonda and La Sonnambula for them. In 1946, Balanchine and Kirstein collaborated again to form Ballet Society, a company which introduced New York subscription-only audiences over the next 2 years to such Balanchine works as The Four Temperaments, and Stravinsky's Renard and Orpheus. Morton Baum, chairman of the City Center Finance Committee, saw Ballet Society during one of their subscription programs at City Center. Baum was so highly impressed that he initiated negotiations that led to the companies being invited to join the City Center Municipal Complex, of which at that time, the New York City Drama Company and the New York City Opera were a part. As the New York City Ballet, they joined. Balanchine's talents at last had found a permanent home. On October 11th, 1948, the New York City Ballet was born, dancing a program consisting of Concerto Barocco, Orpheus, and Symphony in C, a ballet which Balanchine had created for the Paris Opera Ballet the previous year. From that time until his death, Balanchine served as artistic director for the New York City Ballet, choreographing either wholly or in part the majority of the productions the company has introduced since its inception. In June 1972, Balanchine staged the New York City Ballet's first festival, an intensive 1-week celebration of the music of his longtime friend and collaborator, Igor Stravinsky. Of the 20 works that received their world premiere during the festival, he choreographed 8: Stravinsky Violin Concerto, Duo Concertante, choral variations, and new versions of Pulcinella with robins and dances concertantes. An authoritative catalog of his works lists 465 works created by Balanchine in his lifetime, beginning with a pas de deux in 1920 and ending with a solo. This work was entirely re-choreographed in 1982, having been originally staged in 1966. In between, he created a body of work as extensive as it is diverse, ranging from the expansive Symphony in C and the lavishly theatrical Orpheus to such small-scale gems as Pavane. Though it is for his ballet and choreography that Balanchine is most noted, he also worked extensively in theater and movies. He choreographed numerous musical comedies. Balanchine also choreographed numerous opera ballets throughout his career. He staged many of his ballets or excerpts for television, as well as creating works especially for the medium. In 1962, he collaborated with Stravinsky on the original television ballet Noah and the Flood, and in 1981 redesigned his 1975 staging of L'Enfance les Storligues to include a wide range of special effects, including animation. Through television media, millions of people have been able to see the New York City Ballet in their own homes. Choreography by Balanchine, a 4-part Dance in America presentation on the PBS series Great Performances, began in December 1977. Included on the programs have been The Four Temperaments, Cigane, Prodigal Son, Allegro Brilliant, and segments of Jules and Ballo della Regina. Balanchine traveled to Nashville with the company for the videotapings in 77 and 78 and personally supervised every shot, in some cases revising steps or angles to be compatible with the camera. The series has been honored and broadly applauded by critics and audiences all over the country and was nominated for an Emmy. In 1978, the New York City Ballet participated in the acclaimed PBS series Live from Lincoln Center for the first time. Coppelia, choreographed by Balanchine and Alexandra Danilova in 1974, was seen live from the stage of the New York State Theater at Lincoln Center. This presentation also netted Balanchine an Emmy. The company worked again with Live from Lincoln Center 8 years later, this time performing Balanchine's A Midsummer Night's Dream. Balanchine's style has been described as neoclassic, a reaction to the romantic anti-classicism, which had turned into exaggerated theatricality, that was the prevailing style in Russian and European ballet when he had begun to dance. As a choreographer, Balanchine generally de-emphasized plot in his ballets, preferring to let dance be the star of the show, as he once told an interviewer. Nevertheless, tantalizing hints of story color works ranging from Agon to Lieberslieder Walzer and such ballets as La Valse, Apollo, Scotch Symphony, La Sonnambula, Harlequinade, and Prodigal Son, as well as the full-length Nutcracker, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Coppelia, integrated the elements of dance and narrative. And I have a wonderful video to share with you all that is Peter Martin's, who is the former ballet master in chief and principal dancing artist for New York City Ballet. And he's speaking firsthand on his time and his work with George Balanchine.
What he did was he took ballet technique and he expanded it, he extended it, he stretched the limits. He was the greatest romantic choreographer I can think of. Then he was a pure classicist. And then he was a modernist. And these ballets were all very different, yet they were all rooted in the classical language. If you look at some of his very modern ballets, like Agon is one ballet that comes to mind, it's all classical ballet steps with a modern twist here and there. Balanchine's story is fascinating. He left Russia around the time of the revolution, went to Paris, worked with Diaghilev. That's where he first met Stravinsky and Prokofiev, Matisse, Picasso, that whole world. And then he got an invitation from Lincoln Kirstein, who invited Balanchine to come to America. They started a School of American Ballet, where he created his first ballet, Serenade, which is now a classic. There was no grassroots balletic organization in America. And then they started a ballet company. And it folded. And there was like 3 or 4 precursors. And then finally, Morton Baum invited Balanchine and Lincoln to establish the New York City Ballet. That was 1948. When it came to Tchaikovsky, you could see him pour his heart out. Balanchine told me once, he said, "I'm a very sentimental man and I try not to show it in my choreography." He fought it his whole life. When it came to Stravinsky, it was much more of an intellectual challenge for Balanchine. Balanchine revered Stravinsky. There are all these stories about Agon being one of them, where Stravinsky determined how many dancers. It was a 12-tone piece of music, 2 pas de trois, 1 pas de deux, 4 quarter ballet girls, and he informed Balanchine that this is what he wanted. And Balanchine just acquiesced. He looked upon Stravinsky as a guide to him. He made some of the best American ballets on Western themes and Stars and Stripes, Slaughter on 10th Avenue. Who Cares? Wonderful ballet. There are people who call it a Balanchine technique. There was no such thing as a Balanchine technique. It was a classical ballet technique that he built upon. But he was a true traditionalist. He taught America how to dance. Generations after generations after generations. Not only how to dance, but how to look at dance. And he taught audiences how to appreciate classical ballet. There's nobody larger in history of ballet, without exaggeration, than Balanchine.
Wonderful. Good. And that concludes our presentation for today. So Debbie, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, so I would like to open up for questions, but I had a few questions first as someone who's a musician coming at it from the musician's angle. So one thing I've noticed is that often in orchestras we will play, if we play ballet without dancers, we may choose different tempos from when we play ballet with dancers. I think one of the pieces that comes most to mind is the Russian dance, a Nutcracker, Often when we play it for ballet dancers, it's a little slower because I think what makes ballet exciting is how high the jumps are. And as one conductor told us, you can't come down too early. The laws of physics do not allow this ballet dancer to come down any earlier than this downbeat. Whereas conductors, when we don't have the dancers, seem to think the faster the better, especially modern conductors. So I was wondering how much latitude there is in tempos when a choreographer choreographs, like what tempos they have in mind. And you mentioned something that different dancers might also dictate different types of tempos for the same choreography. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Certainly, certainly. So especially with the classics, I think the dancer largely dictates the tempo. And that's the beauty of having, a large scale professional company like New York City Ballet or Houston Ballet or American Ballet Theater is we have our beloved conductors to help us as the dancer. A lot of it, different dancers have different strengths. And so you may have an adagio dancer who really excels at that long, sustained, extended, slower movement. And then you have a dancer who's got the quick twitch muscles, who really can move in allegro work very, very well. So I think a lot of the need for variation in tempo is dependent on the dancer and what their strengths or growth areas are. So yeah, and then in the contemporary realm, nowadays, I think you see a lot that choreographers choose their music and the corresponding tempos as it's written or composed. And then you pick the dancer that fits that can fit with the music and do complete their idea. So it's kind of both and, I think, as most things are. But yeah, I think kind of drawing that distinction in the classical works, there is a good bit of room.
And considering we do have a ballet pianist here, Peter Schaaf mentioned that he did that early in his career. Yes. So do you work out all those tempos with the pianist first and then convey that to the conductor, or do you know from the dancer's point of view how early the conductor is brought into the practice at the practice? You work it out with the pianist first and then convey it.
Precisely. Yes. Yeah. A lot of that in the in-studio work is very much with the pianist. We partner with them for those things. And I think typically, there's some variation on this, but typically about the week before stage rehearsals begin, the conductor will come in and sit in rehearsals with the pianist, the principal pianist. And then we take that to the stage. But even quite often, for whatever reason, when we're on the stage, if there's some need, as the dancer, we can communicate that to artistic staff, who can communicate that to the conductor and work together to make those adjustments. So that happens all the time. But yeah.
And then one more question from my end, and that is about counting. I haven't studied a lot of ballet, but I've noticed that, for instance, in ballroom dance, one thing that would drive me crazy is my teacher would jump two, and then I finally saw a teaching video where the teacher was counting something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So the number would move from where the beat is in the music, whereas a musician might say 1 and 3, yes. 4, 1 and. So and the other thing, of course, is sometimes dances are phrased in 8. So where we might count to 4 twice, as musicians, a dancer might count to 8. But you mentioned something about counting with children yesterday. And then the other question, which we didn't bring up yesterday, is counting something complex like Stravinsky. And one thing that comes to mind, I watched my nephew, who's now grown up, but when he was about 5 years old, he was the Tyrannosaurus Rex in Fantasia, where they do Rite of Spring. And he had those lunges absolutely perfect. I was stunned because they come at very irregular periods. And he had internalized it, I'm sure, without being able to count all the 7/8 and 9/8 and 11/8. So I was wondering how dancers approach music like that.
Yeah, it is interesting. A lot of that approach, I think, is just memorizing. Like, you just have to learn it like you learn the choreography. If you think about the Nutcracker, the battle scene in the Nutcracker is arguably one of the most difficult sections of music in a ballet to count for the dancer. It's so tough, especially on my end now where we restage that. It's very, very complex. So a lot of it's just, you have to teach the children to memorize what that is. And as I said to you yesterday, Debbie, for kids specifically, it really has to be in its most distilled form, the counting. So right now, I think I mentioned before the meeting started, we're working on studies, which is a Czerny score at our school. And I'm responsible for the level 5 piece. These are like 10, 11-year-old children that have to learn this this piece. And this particular piece of Czerny's has a lot of odd phrases, like the way we would count as a dancer. There's like a 7 and there's a 9. And like Debbie said, we're used to counting in like 4s and 8s. And so these children are pretty acclimated to 4s and 8s. And then all of a sudden you throw a 7 at them and there's like 9 million and counts in there. And so I have to choose for their sake, instead of like 1 and 2 and 3, and which is the entrance, I just go 1, 2, 3. I could do the and, but I feel like that for where they are in their development, it makes it more complex. So part of my job is to try to distill those things down to where they can grasp them and be their most successful. But it's fascinating stuff. So I hope that answered that, Debbie.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me that I often notice the way a dancer thinks is more when the emphasis is in the dance and the movement.
Yes.
Whereas we can have, and the meanings of words like syncopation were different. I don't know how it is in ballet, but in ballroom dance, it just means simply having a division in the beat, like ba, 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 ba. Whereas for us, it's actually an emphasis on the offbeat, which also comes in dance. But then my teacher would go 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
So completely different meanings. So I've now clicked that you guys are now allowed to unmute yourself. If anybody else has a question or comment, please jump in.
That was absolutely fascinating to me. I just really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Knew the name George Balanchine, but I didn't know anything about him.
Oh, well, I'm so thrilled to get to share this with you all. Thanks.
There's this, I forget who it was supposed to be, but maybe it's apocryphal. Some ballet master was asking the pianist to play Big 3.
Yes.
So the pianist started playing a big waltz. Do you know the story?
I don't think so, but yeah.
And the guy says, no, I want 3 big beats. And he played a bigger waltz. And he says, no, I want 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1.
Yeah.
Which isn't exactly 3.
Not yes. Yeah. That's amazing. It is, the communication with our pianists is just invaluable. And honestly, some of them have become my best friends just from like the closeness that we have to be in working. And Bill Patterson is our coordinator, our pianist coordinator at Houston Ballet Academy. And he's just so enormously helpful. Like I'll be needing to teach a petit allegro, which is small, fast jumps to our students. And I'm just I need help. I need to hear something. And so I'm like, Bill, can you just play like a quick 6/8 for me or something for petit allegro? And he'll just pull out the most brilliant and beautiful music. And it's completely inspiring to me. And that helps to create the exercise. So the partnership with our pianists is necessary and valuable and quite wonderful. But I'm pretty sure I'm guilty of that, Peter, myself. I'm saying I want a big 3 and it ends up something entirely different. But
it's amazing that kids can learn these things. So,
isn't it? Yes.
My daughter was in the chorus of the Metropolitan Opera, the children's chorus, and they had to learn things by rote. No music was allowed. They had to memorize right from the very beginning, all in 3 different languages. It was just fascinating.
It's fantastic.
They all did it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, you can see that in our children too. I mean, the ability to see and do in movement just never ceases to amaze me, like what they're capable of. Yeah. It is remarkable. So
they don't know it's not possible, so they don't.
So they just do it. Yeah, exactly. I love that. Yeah, I see that in my 2.5-year-old son. Also, he doesn't know the limit, so he just goes. It's great.
The
Yeah,
limits come later.
they do. Yes. Yeah. Uh,
Well, may I ask, how do you translate the steps that Balanchine choreographed before video? I suppose video took this videoed his choreography, but before you were able to video it, how do you take it? What does he do? Does he write down what the steps are and then you translate it?
Yes, I do believe there is a system for notation of Balanchine's works. There is a dear friend of mine, Lars Nelson. I interviewed him recently for our students at Houston Ballet Academy, and he said the most amazing thing about their ballet mistress, Rosemarie, she was one of a partner to Balanchine. She worked very, very closely with him. And there's all sorts of repetitors in the Balanchine trust that came from either having danced directly with Balanchine or having worked closely with him in the studio. And what Lars said about Rosemary that's the most amazing thing is someone will ask a question in rehearsal and she will close her eyes and like disappear for a moment and then come back with it exactly as it was. So it's this remarkable photographic memory she has of her work with him. So I think that's invaluable to the company, but as those things will inevitably phase out, I do believe they have a system of notation, as I said earlier, of his works, and then also these video catalogs that we do have now. But I had so much respect for that with Rosemary, just her firsthand knowledge and kind of treasuring, I would say, of that time with Balanchine and how firm that is in her. So.
Well, I noticed that, what do you call the people who prepare the dancers with the steps?
Yes, either rehearsal directors, ballet masters, or repetitors.
Repetitors, I noticed in the score, so you're teaching these dancers the steps. I think it's just amazing, absolutely amazing. Not necessarily just Balanchine, but Stanton Welch or any of the choreographers.
Yes, yeah. No, I do. I love those things, and it's a very unique challenge. Very, very different, I would say, from teaching a class. Because teaching a class is very creative. You're forming the steps and the exercises for what the students need for their training. There's a syllabus that we follow. But with restaging existing works, it's a whole different ball of wax.
Well, thank you for presenting the story of Balanchine, pictures and all. That was beautiful.
Thank you. My pleasure. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. We do have some music today, and we realized that Gayle Martin had on her recording, Keep the Dark Away, I believe is the name of the recording of the whole CD. She has several movements of Romeo and Juliet. And while I'm calling it up, maybe Gayle, are you there? You could introduce your approach to it.
I learned the Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet suite because I used to go to the American Ballet Theater in New York all the time, and I would compare the casts. And with the young Juliet, which is the movement you're going to hear now, I have in mind Alessandra Ferri, who had I saw her dance Romeo and Juliet maybe 6 or 7 times. All in New York. There were people who actually traveled the world to see her dance in other places, but it was an amazing experience. And so when I play these pieces, I absolutely think of ABT. First of all, Betsy, I just want to say how much I enjoyed your talk. I just love ballet. And the rest of, I'm going to play a nocturne by Chopin, and then Peter will play some more Chopin. And the choreographers used Chopin to make wonderful, wonderful dances out of. There was something called In the Night that used 4 nocturnes. This is not one of those nocturnes, but it could have been. There's Les Selfies, there's The Gathering. There are all kinds of things which I'm going to forget the names of, but I saw them all in New York, which was a lot of fun. So this is the Chopin Nocturne in G major.
I'm also going to play a nocturne and a waltz. Those are the two things that seem to be most frequently danced to. The funny thing about my nocturne and waltz is that they're not called that, they're both etudes. Um, the, the nocturne type etude is really, it's a study because it's a duet, a very extended duet. Chopin brought a lot of little duets in many of his pieces, but this is the whole piece. Is the bass is very active, and the treble is a little more subdued, but it's very hard to balance them all the way through. That's the study part. The waltz is it's a sort of happy, perky, but also a little. It's a very. I had the word before, and I can't think of it now. It's. Well, you can tell by my hand. It's both a little sad and a little happy at the same time. And then in the middle, it has there's a separate part in the middle which is gorgeous waltz. Anyway, the whole thing can be danced, and actually that was used in the Jerome Robbins. I think it's at a gathering, dances at a gathering. So, okay, I have to turn this down so you don't hear this.
But now we're going to hear a blast from the past. This is one of the great violinists of all time, Michael Rabin. He was 15 in the video clip you're going to hear when he played for the Tuesday Musical Club in 1955. He was, I think he was 19, 18, 19. So back then it was quite extraordinary. We had quite extraordinary people. We still have extraordinary people, but boy. Anyway, Michael Rabin very unfortunately died young, but you'll hear him as a 16-year-old.
The stage, 15-year-old Michael Rabin, ladies and gentlemen.
Betsy, how can we thank you? This was so wonderful. For all of us that love dance and try to go as often as we can, this was a real pleasure and such a treasure that you have in your archives to be able to learn about Maestro Balanchine. Thank you.